Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Jessica Talisman here, and this is the second time we've done an interview, and she is running Contextually as a consultancy, and very excited to get into that and all things knowledge management. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stewart. It's great to be here. I'm excited for our conversation. It's been a while.
Yeah, last time you came in and totally changed everyone's minds on ontologies, particularly within big companies. And so far, everything I've seen so far is like there's the people like me who are vibe coding, and it doesn't feel like I need an ontology yet. But if I were to build a bigger company and do anything with AI, it feels like ontologies are actually really important. Is that accurate? Is that
really important? And I've had interesting experiences with people that have vibe coded apps, starting with nothing between, like you might have a Postgres database or something connected, depending on how you determine or decide to collect and deploy. And so what's interesting is with vibe coding, we're seeing, vibe coded engineering or apps where, people will deploy, problems will occur, right? I mean, there's going to be data issues. And what I'm seeing most often is the need for ETL, ELT, or handling of transformations, for example, as something scales and builds and grows. So getting in front of that sooner than later, highly advised, because I've seen a lot of issues, downstream and upstream. So, yeah.
Yeah, because there's so many things that this is what I'm learning. We just talked about it, vibe coding, vibe engineering, and maybe even just removing the term vibes from the whole thing because vibes is unprofessional or whatever. But even though it is, like, all the investors are vibe investors, and even if they say that that's not true, that's really what's going on. Everybody's just always focused on vibes all the time. But we'll put that aside for the moment. ETL, extract, transform, load. I learned this from my friend who is a genius programmer, and he's been teaching me how to do all this stuff. But we're talking about prototypes, and we're talking about big systems, scalable systems. Now, from vibe coding, I am learning how to prototype. And that's really interesting because it's giving me a very good product intuition to how to build a product. But like you said, there's just like we're dealing in really complex spaces where there's a lot of complexity, whether you're building the prototype or whether you're doing large systems. And knowledge management, information architecture, all these things we've talked about a lot, like that's like that, but for civilization. Because it's like, besides just products, like we're also dealing with like how to do information at all these different levels. What do you think about all that, everything I just said?
Well, yeah, I mean, like the big issue is, okay, great. You've built a product, accounting for that product. Like, what are the requirements? What are the user stories? Like making sure that you get
interesting
with all of the product planning and development work. And then you're looking at, okay, so what are your metrics? How are you gauging performance? How are you determining what feature to deploy next? Right? And how do you collect that feedback? I mean, that is information and knowledge management. And how do you place meaning? So, for example, I could build an e-commerce app of some sort and name something accessories. And that's very ambiguous as a category because as something grows and scales, there can be all these different types of accessories.
Yeah, interesting.
Without adding the nuances and the details around what these things are, because ultimately you're not going to have a viable and scalable product if you can't account for those things from an information and knowledge management perspective. It starts with controlled vocabularies. It does not have to be sophisticated.
It's really interesting, the controlled vocabularies and ontologies. I discovered since our last talk that ontology is a discipline in philosophy, and it means, the nature of being, which is like really, really philosophical, really just kind of like out there. You can talk about it on psychedelics and stuff like that. But it also just means the way that words exist and objects exist and how they attach to being, like existent being, right?
And really, let's simplify it even more, because if you look on Wikipedia, and a lot of people will argue Wikipedia is not a reliable resource, but
Yeah,
it is a
it
reliable
is. Yeah,
resource for
yeah.
distinguishing the base definition.
Oh,
And so if you look up ontology, there are two different pages for
oh,
two different concepts. So there is ontology a la philosophy, and ontology a la information science. And they do have distinct definitions and meaning. And of course, here we are with controlled vocabularies defining ontologies, but it's a homonym if you think about it in terms of the differences between the two. However,
oh.
it is about categorization and defining. If we were to look at things from a higher level, it's about
Yeah.
categorization and defining. And that is the most simplistic definition. But yes, through the process of doing so, we define meaning.
Okay, that's really important that there are two distinct things that I was putting together based on the philosophy. And I love it that,
Yeah.
that Palantir is the one who figured this out. And and nobody knows what Palantir does unless I think I know what they do now. Let me try to figure out what. So in 2001, there was this total information awareness program that the government set up as in response to 9/11. It was shut down by the Congress because of privacy, which is now no longer an issue, basically. But total information awareness, all the same crew of people who came up with that, then also are all the same crew as a part of Palantir.
Yes.
And what they did is they figured out that you could build an ontology for these large data sets, and then you bring in a forward deployed engineer, which is a fancy word for an engineer who asks a bunch of questions and figures out all the data and stuff like that. And because the ontology gives them the awareness to pinpoint anything in the data set. Is that accurate? Is that?
Yeah, but Palantir's, according to the definition of an ontology in information science, Palantir's is not really an ontology, and it's definitely not open. Although there are now arguments that say, well, ontology doesn't have to form triples, which is subject, object, predicate statements. It doesn't have to be RDF. We're getting into this interesting space that now that ontologies are coming onto the main stage and gaining more focus, you're getting people within the ecosystem. They're saying, well, actually, I have a different definition of ontology. Just like facing semantic layers, like everyone trying to define what a semantic layer is. We like to argue about these things, but I don't see it as a bad thing, because it is what fuels innovation.
That's how you categorize, right? That's how you categorize, is you argue about what things are. And to a lot of people, it seems like navel gazing. But as you discussed in front of the AI Whisperers Club, it's like Amazon uses this for their whole product catalog because it's too big, right?
Yes. And it's making sense. Ultimately, it's about sense making for machines and people. And I think that's what's more important, is that we are looking for interoperability, machine readability, machine understanding, right? It doesn't stop at a label for a human on the front end. It shouldn't. We are getting confused with the word semantics. And some of us take it more literally than others. Some of us think it just means having a text label that is human, literal or a lexical label. And sure, that is semantics, but it's half baked, because back to the vibe coding or AI engineering, if you're it's all about communication, right? And when we build things just humans, absent of AI, we rely on each other, right? We have to communicate. And the same is true for machines. Like, we have to communicate in order to build reliable, scalable, extensible systems.
Interesting. Okay. Communication with machines and communication with people. And actually just gave a talk an hour ago about that, because I've discovered that AI hallucinates because AI doesn't have the context, and they don't have the context because they don't have the ontologies and because they don't have that access to data, because they can't communicate with all of that data. And that's why they hallucinate. And
and moving beyond syntax. So we've relied on these storage systems And so we can have these Postgres or SQL data ecosystems, but that does not lend context. It's basically enumeration. If we think about it, and how we are expecting a certain level of clairvoyance from AI, that it's
Yeah,
like
interesting.
the idea that we expect just absolute immediate understanding and translation of our internal data ecosystems, and then we're relying on some pretty intense packages and libraries that we have to use to try to force these Postgres or SQL environments to behave the way we want to, because knowledge cannot be very well represented. The complexity of knowledge cannot be very well represented in Postgres or SQL
Why not?
environments.
Why not?
Because you lacked the descriptive aspects and you lack the interoperability and machine readability that is able to very explicitly declare what things are and what those definitions are. And then beyond that, an actual semantic or neuro-symbolic system is going to be able to encode the meaning and not be reliant upon primary keys and foreign keys. When we build databases, you have tables, and then all of a sudden we're having to support very complex SQL queries in order to make information become knowledge, right?
Okay,
Because
this gets to the question that actually sparked me asking you for the podcast, which is, if library science has a 3,000 year head start on the work of classifying knowledge, how did it get so thoroughly sidelined by the data first SQL based world that now rules modern tech?
And I just wrote about this, Stewart.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I wrote about this in my last two articles. So one is Language is Political, and the other, which talks very explicitly about these things, and the other is the controlled vocabulary piece. And it just so happens that in the 90s, with the advent of the internet, the data world and technology world went the way or the path of big data. Collect as much as possible, focus on storage. We'll figure out what to do with that data once we collect it and have it and we amass it. And it was sort of like a greed, just all about allocation and volume. At the same time, librarians, the exact same time, librarians were like, there's a lot of data, and now we have the internet. Let's create metadata schemas, which have ontology backbones.
Whoa.
And let's devise systems that deal with the interchange, communication, exchange of information. That we can make it machine readable, usable, reliable, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, and retrievable, the FAIR principles. And that became the track of library science and librarians. So you had this sort of splitting at the road. And then they went on parallel tracks. There were some interesting collaborative efforts over the years where librarians have been dealing with these massive worldwide catalogs that Google and Amazon rely on.
Interesting.
And so there was some other development that's happened over these years, but it's not until now that we've had that, excuse my language, but oh shit moment, that we failed to pay attention to all of these things that library science have been doing and has deployed.
Interesting. Because nobody talks about that in big tech. No, you're the only person who I've ever come in contact with who has 1 foot in tech and 1 foot in the library of science. Like no one else sort of talks about this stuff. I mean, since then I've now been introduced to all the other people on LinkedIn who nerd out on this stuff. But really, it's not. They're not worlds. Why did it split so big in the 90s? What's the history behind it?
I really think that it was the big data thing for sure. And the value of big data, like the very definition of data, and it was all about acquisition, right? Acquisition, building, scaling, and The more data you had, the more informed your business could be about making decisions. That was one part of it.
But that was
And
all BS though, right? Because they don't actually have the way to turn it into knowledge, right?
pretty flat, but I think that with some customer, if you think of the Google landscape and ecosystem, if you're doing anything online that relies on traffic, attention, and acquisition of customers, the old Google model relied on, 89% of Google's revenue is
Yeah.
advertising and marketing,
Okay.
right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we're also seeing now with AI the collapse of that old internet or web model
Yes.
with walled gardens and such. That's not the game. That's
Yeah.
not the game anymore. So now, there are things like GEO, right? Or generative or AEO. Some people are calling AEO the equivalent of SEO, but for
Yeah.
AI.
Yep.
The game's very different. Now the game has shifted to, do you have schema.org, which is an ontology, markup on page,
Wow.
right? So the focus now is shifting to ontology. Schema.org has always been there, but it was never the focus and never
Yeah.
prioritized.
Interesting.
And now one of the issues is because there's so much AI generated content and a lot of slop, it's making it's making the web so noisy.
Yeah.
How does the
Interesting.
cream get to the top? So the whole ecosystem is shifting and changing.
So you see, how do you battle AI slop with ontologies? And library science? Because this is so cool. Because from what I got from what you just said is that Google in the 90s turned on a spigot for money based on the web search, and they did something really interesting, which was peer review, peer ranking, all these different things, but it was very just basic. Now
Yes.
we're moving from just information to knowledge. So we
Yes.
just had information on the internet. We were just cataloging information, and there's these two different ways to go about it. Now we're getting into knowledge and how to and machine knowledge. And
Yes.
so, and we've got a huge, like, barbarians are at the gate. AI slop is just completely making it really weird to go on the internet, and it's not going to turn off. Like, that's going to get weirder and weirder. And so where do the library science fit into that? How does that help us?
We have been deconstructing this space. There are more librarians entering the field, which is awesome.
So cool. Yeah.
Which is great. Like
Yeah.
the acknowledgement that you
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
more than one. You need more than one token library science person. That was
Yeah. Interesting.
experience, and actually just got back from the Semantic Data New York conference where I presented, and one of the speakers said something very interesting, which was when she comes from a library science background, and she said, when I look for a job now, I look for where I'm not the only one.
Yeah, interesting. I was in that position. I was and you call it library science or information science, but it feels like library science, information science, and knowledge management. And I was the one knowledge management profession, and it was like a total impossible. It was a totally impossible job.
You have no one, if you have no other human to bounce your ideas off of,
interesting.
a tag team to build and scale a knowledge management system, it's totally unreasonable. I will tell you that when I was at Adobe, I was wearing all hats. I was product manager, fine.
Yeah.
I was the taxonomist. I was the ontologist. I was the program manager. I was the knowledge graph engineer. Like, I was wearing all the hats, single-handedly building this whole knowledge ecosystem. And I look across the way, and my partners have a team of 4 software engineers, an ML engineer, a big team of data engineers and AI ML engineers. And it's just, it takes, like, that's something we're realizing is human in the loop also means collaborative models. Like we're collapsing the stack. We're collapsing. A lot of these roles are collapsing, shifting, and changing. And so, and
the product manager role now feels like under threat, because now I'm a product manager. As a AI engineer, I am now a product manager. So I'm managing the entire product, but I'm not managing that product, and I'm still at the prototype stage. So I'm not trying to say that this is the way it works at the big organizations, but like I'm prototyping it, I'm managing the product, and I'm not interfacing with other humans except as it relates to the actual putting it in their hands, which I'm barely at that step right now. But it's like an internal thing where I'm just like building this product and I'm managing the agents, and the agents are doing and building the product. And what you just said about having only one knowledge management person or information architecture person at the organization means that, like, it feels like the way it's going to work in 5 years is that you have a knowledge management person on every single team, because it's interdisciplinary, right? Like knowledge is interdisciplinary. So if I can connect that to what I just said, it's like somebody building a product needs to have a knowledge management person on their team so that they can cross the boundaries into all the other different parts of the business, basically, right? Yeah. What do you think?
Or even like another example is like at a large organization, and I've had this before. So I've had the multidisciplinary team. I've had the pleasure and the joy of having that experience. But there's also the idea of centrality in that, even though, you know, there's a lot of discussion going on right now in general of if our teams should be central, if our data should be central or distributed.
Yeah.
Right. And what I have found to be most successful, and this also comes through in my consulting, is that when you have a Switzerland or a neutral type of team that sits with operations or somewhere that is politically neutral, that you're able to handle and reconcile data coming from different products and environments. The part of the art of librarianship, if we can call it an art, is you do try to remove bias as much as possible, and there's methods to do so. You know, and I've spoken about that, and the sort of ontology pipeline represents that, is how to just, you know, go through step-by-step stage, you know, in a staged and phased approach of building a knowledge ecosystem. But as you can imagine, like, you know, there's also the intersections and the ability to incorporate the different data streams and formats and representations, and also be able to distribute the same, you know, the output, input, output.
Yeah. How do you remain neutral inside of an organization? And like, there's the explicit and the implicit type of stuff. So it's like, because sometimes you can't talk about the politics, sometimes you can talk about the politics, and it depends on the culture of the company. But then how do you remain neutral, and what's the relationship between that and knowledge as well?
You know, that's so interesting, because so many of us, it's sort of having, you can't see your nose in spite of your face. It ends up being, you know, I have been in environments where the internal speak and internal vocabulary, the definitions for things, the context for things is totally different than the real meaning of the word. So you walk out the door of your organization, and your organization defines something as access. And what they mean by access, just that concept, which is core, like a core word, actually means a feature in a product. It's the name of, if that's the name of a feature in a product. Well, you can imagine, think of an LLM, most of the commercial models, all of the commercial models, obviously trained on the internet. Sight unseen, an agent or AI is going to understand first the meaning of the word access according to training data.
We're back at the same thing of the language, where two different words or one word means a whole bunch of different things.
A whole bunch of different things. And so internal definitions, that's a bias. That's a very simple bias to understand, is no, this is the corporate, this is my organization's speak. This is our definition of things. Doesn't matter what the outside world thinks. So the first thing is to touch grass. We'll call it vocabulary touching grass. Is you have to reconcile that with the outside world, with the real world. Like, okay, or this organization's definition for access is X. The real definition or the canonical definition of that thing is Y. So that's the first part, is just checking those words and the meanings behind those words to make sure that we communicate accurately.
And that's controlled vocabulary.
Controlled vocabularies. That's where it concepts.
Okay.
There's and controlled vocabularies are absolutely fundamentally very critical for AI. It's the most simple structure you can build, but it's absolutely critical for helping to disambiguate what
What do
these
you mean?
things.
What do you mean by disambiguate?
So it's having to clarify for machines that yes, access means this in your
Yeah.
context.
Yeah. Got it.
But in our world, it means this feature of this
Yeah.
product.
This is the hardest thing to understand about the machines is that it's an alien mind. It's the first time we've had alien minds. And so how do you communicate with an alien mind? This is what all the foundational labs are trying to do, but they don't have transparency into that.
Yep.
And that totally tangential question, but that are you familiar with the world of what's the word, neuronal interpretability and black box, like, and for my listeners, like neuronal interpretability is the neuron level understanding of like how much do we know what the neuron is doing at the very like bottom level, and then the black box is how do you actually see what the whole thing is doing. And from my understanding, when I looked into it about a year ago, is that we have barely any neuronal interpretability and we have no idea what's going on in the black box. But it feels like, are you investigating this as to how the ontologies are and the controlled vocabularies and all the machine interpretability is going on, and like whether there's been any innovation there?
Yeah, there, relying or speculating as for what the black box includes or what's in the box is, I think, sort of fruitless in a way.
Because you can't tell.
You really can't tell. I've been rereading a great book. For anyone interested, there's an older book called Organizing Knowledge Taxonomies, Knowledge and Organizational Effectiveness, and it's by Patrick Lamb. And I really highly suggest, picking up the book if you want to understand knowledge management space. He mentioned something very interesting in one of the chapters about knowledge management and says, it's really hard to globally define knowledge because culturally it can also be so different, right? And you hear feedback where people will state things like, well, I'm from Kenya, and when I ask AI to write for me, it's not able to capture my voice.
Interesting.
Nuances and words and whatever is really calibrated towards,
because it has the language, it has the Kenyan, it has English, but maybe has some of the Kenyan languages, but does not have the Kenyan cultural grammar in it at all, basically.
Right. And so something that he says that caught my eye when I was reading last night was in culturally knowledge in the US Western society is category focused.
Interesting.
The definitions of ontologies. But in China, it's context oriented.
Yeah, interesting.
Western is category, Chinese is context.
Yep.
Right? So you have these different cultural lenses. And so when we're looking at global systems and how different cultures and knowledge management systems can be supported, it can shift. And it can shift by way of the model. So speculating, I think the most helpful thing to know of how to work best with knowledge management and AI systems is to actually, there's a Washington Post article, I think from the beginning of 2025, that's like an open, it's not locked down, paywalled, that has all of the training data that exists in OpenAI and Anthropic.
Oh, interesting.
The sources, the URLs, the 15,
interesting.
Right? So if you actually look at it from a systems perspective and realize the influences of the training data, you're going to get a better idea of how to best construct knowledge. Not perfect, but you can start to connect some of those dots if you look at the organizational structure and the supporting strata in Wikidata, in Google Scholar, in Google Patents.
Yeah, interesting.
Really highly, some of the highly sourced training data.
Brilliant. So I'm definitely going to try to find that article afterwards, and I've got it in my notes to ask it, and we'll put it in the notes.
Like this, I have it like because I've read this book I don't know how many times, but just
Beautiful.
for listeners, it's just one of those books that I think gives you really, really strong foundations for understanding knowledge management in general.
And that, I mean, and we started with the question of essentially how do we know what's going on in these LLMs, but then you brought it back to essentially we don't even know what knowledge is, because knowledge is culturally contextual, like, and like it transcends culture as well, because knowledge is this thing that is based on the individual, because
Yep.
my knowledge is different than your knowledge, and it's based off of my entire history. It feels like the patterns of us as embodied observers is really similar. Like,
Yes.
I would say that humans in general are pretty similar. There's all these like differences that in the content, but the context of who we are, I think, is actually
Yep.
like a basic pattern. But it's infinite variability because our characteristics are
So unique
so
and
different. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
There's another really good book. It's hard for me
Yeah.
to have a conversation without going down into my little library of I recently read a book called Breakneck.
Cool.
And it's about how, and it's another interesting read, and it relates to knowledge. And Breakneck specifically is about China and why China, I know,
Interesting.
why China has an advantage right now
Yeah.
with AI and AI systems. And it points to and talks about process knowledge. I don't know if you know what process, there's all these different types of knowledge.
Yep.
So
Yep.
process,
Interesting.
how it's tacit and explicit, but it's how we make things, how we do things, how humans do things and make things.
Yeah.
That is documentation end to end. It's like descriptive context around how do I make this widget? Back to the vibe coding as well. The US has basically, and what a lot of Western countries has basically like
All gone. Yeah.
or outsourced process
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We haven't documented that very well. And so if you think about process knowledge, like it starts with documenting, okay, great, you vibe coded or you AI engineered this app, get your process knowledge in order, because you may not know and have visibility to how this thing was built, obviously. But start asking when you do AI engineer an app or a feature or function or whatever, that the agent delivers documentation or a PRD, product, requirement document or whatever.
Yeah.
Because if we all of a sudden have this dearth or lack of complete absence, which we're already sitting there already, we forget how to make chips. We forget how to make washers and dryers. We forget how to make, it's the outsourcing versus, like you said, the embodiment.
Yeah. And this is, I do these weekly high signal posts for our AI Whisperers group. And about 4 weeks ago, I went and did a deep dive into China and why they're releasing open source models when it's Silicon Valley created open source, like it's from Silicon Valley. All of the foundational, like Meta just gave it up. And the only reason Meta was doing open source was because they were behind and they wanted to catch up. And then all of a sudden, like 5 of the best open source models come from China. And like, why are they doing this? They also open sourced a lot of the chip architecture. So they've open sourced a huge amount of they're at the 7 nanometer chip. So, and that's not anywhere close to where Taiwan and TSMC are, which is at the 2 to 3 nanometer. But they're at 7 nanometers, and they've open sourced everything about their robotics and everything else, except for a few things. One, like the design of a servo motor, which I just learned about for my Raspberry Pis, because I'm going to start building the servo motors soon. There's a few other sort of things, but it's all the technical specifications and the process knowledge. So that the one thing they're not open sourcing is the process knowledge of how they, because as you accurately described it, we outsourced all of the things, and then Apple went to Taiwan, and then Apple ended up teaching the Chinese how to do not what TSMC was doing, but how to do all of the other stuff. And so basically Apple did the knowledge transfer in this very interesting way. And somehow 30 years later, now we have to figure out how to actually do it. I think the China versus the US thing is not as accurate as described either, but such an interesting time. I want to go back to the process knowledge, because that is a core thing that I learned at the company where I was the director of knowledge management, and now doing it on my own, but with alien minds of how to document all of the knowledge. And the funniest thing is that every time I try to do it, I have to go and review what they wrote, because they always get really lazy and they don't actually do it, which is hilarious. But yeah, it's so interesting to think about knowledge management while building these products and like leaving traces of it. And it really is like, goes back to our early discussion last time, which is that knowledge management is hard because it's a habit, right? It's a habit to do knowledge management. Yeah.
Brushing your teeth or water, or dental hygiene, whatever you want to call it. It really is. And it's a habit. I think a lot of folks were so inundated in this culture of build fast, break things, that knowledge management is inevitably slower. And it follows more of a design thinking pace, and a little bit different than, sure, you can deal with knowledge management in an agile, break it up into agile sprints, and that's okay. But your knowledge doesn't really manifest itself in the same way. Now, what librarians have done in these sort of parallel tracks where the tech has just been collecting data and amassing these, large data ecosystems and dealing with it, or trying to leverage it. Librarians have been documenting and do process knowledge, because as you stated when we first started, like when you look at a discipline that's 3,000 years old, we can pretty well follow the timeline technologically, of sort of the transfer of skills and effort, with the evolution of technology. Like computers came online. You can start with the knitting machine. That was the foundation for modern computers. Like all of these systems have core aspects that are founded in library and information science. Not all of it, but a lot of aspects. Like there's a fabulous book, I think I have it posted on my Substack, called AI and Automation at the Library of Congress, that was published in 1963. Think about that. And it was trying to automate the connection and the interoperability, and knowledge ecosystem, connecting, I think, over 100 libraries across, this is pre-internet.
Oh, interesting.
The US and Canada. That was done successfully.
Whoa.
So, you think of Tim Berners-Lee, it was all about linking documents across the web, the whole inception of so it's not like these concepts are foreign to us and how we manage knowledge. It's just culturally, it's been about this epic breakneck speed of building and scale and competition and free market and all of those things that has sort of pushed knowledge and especially to the side. We don't have time. We don't have time to document what we're doing. Right?
So yeah, gonna get that article. So because the linkage of knowledge, 1963, so they're linking all of the knowledge between the libraries, and librarians documented all of the knowledge that relates to technology, but it's almost like the meta angle. So they've got all the metadata on how technology has interacted with society for the entire time. It's just nobody's looking at it. So it's like not nobody's looking at it, but most people are ignoring it, particularly inside of technology, because this culture of break fast. And that really feels like it brings in the monetary elements of it, which is that 1990s was the last time the U.S. had their budget under control, with a budget surplus, I believe. And then 2008 is when we started just printing with abandon. And now 2020, printing more with abandon. And so we're sort of, and that, it feels really connected, because that's 2006 is when Facebook came up with the break thing or move things, break fast, whatever. And since then it's just been about breaking things. And it's not like China's outside of this though, because China has also played that game in terms of printing a lot of money. They're in a major real estate crisis, and data center 80% of their data centers are not utilized because they overbuilt in the same way they overbuilt real estate, or because DeepSeek and all the other architectural improvements to their LLMs have made the data centers useless. So it's like, we're that cultural piece of the just breaking things is really interesting, because it's almost like we do have to return to like the Western way of the way we're doing things. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's returning to first principles and slowing things down a bit.
Yeah.
There is incredible overspending by organizations. It's been, let's
interesting.
is it a strategy to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks? Is that
interesting?
And when we start to grapple with context, you hear most of the conversations revolving around the semantic layer, meaning in BI or analytics, which is just basically saying what these things are. It's not really connecting. You can have a semantic layer that's much richer than just having lexical or text labels. So it's really about a controlled vocabulary can work into that sort of BI analytics type semantic layer. But we have not in the United States really done a good job of standing up or bolstering knowledge management and making it a core function. Now, what's really interesting is if you look at what libraries are doing, because a lot of librarians just can't be bothered with the tech.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting. They're still using the old technology.
They're using AI, but using AI strategically as a partner or a tool. And they are very focused on reliability, accuracy, hallucinations. Like, they're solving around those core problems, knowing that the context that is enabled by a library, system is really dialed in and very good. You will see, library metadata has already gone through a process, and you already have controlled vocabularies. Like, you're not having to wrestle with a lack of context. Librarians are starting already with a pretty good, what would be considered excellent in most technology ecosystems, context. So they're able to take what's already been built and then take it to the next step way more easily.
I want to, for the last 10 minutes or so, I want to go into libraries. How does it work in a library right now in terms of because there are librarians in libraries doing the things librarians have been doing for a really long time. They're doing it with new technology, but they're also doing it with these sort of like standards that have been set over a really long period of time. Like, what is going on inside of libraries? Like, what does a librarian do if they get hired by a library? What do they do?
Yeah, so it depends on if you're academic librarianship or public or special. There's like a million different types of librarianship. You could be a reference librarian, youth librarian, teen librarian.
Wow.
You could be a collection development specialist. So there's so many tracks of work. But the thing, I'll just pick out what I'm most excited about in the different realms. So with an academic librarianship, there is some amazing work going on at I just saw the coolest job posted for Dartmouth yesterday, which is an AI, these AI librarians. And I had posted about this on LinkedIn a few, maybe like 1 or 2 months ago, is the concept of we need AI librarians. Wouldn't it be awesome to have actual AI libraries, meaning and what I mean by that is for training data, that librarians becoming it's just a sort of far off fantasy, but the idea of librarians becoming the actual organizers and curators of these
that's definitely needed.
Houses to clean up, or even services, even service-based AI library where you hand over your data and then it's structured and beautified. Whoa. And there's all these different ways, but you see these AI librarians that are coming in to universities and helping to teach, disseminate, and roll out safe AI right? Say, how do you, media literacy, AI literacy, those types of missions. You see some automation going on in cataloging,
Hmm.
which is great because catalog records, if you can save time there, other things, which is wonderful. And there's, catalogs, it's becoming a little bit more efficient, but you also, again, are dealing with a lot of slop.
Well,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, this is the point that so I feels like that's a good that you should set up a boutique data training center that hires a lot of librarians, and
I
then
was thinking about
yeah,
that.
yeah, because there are I've done some deep dives because I worked at a company that did data training, RLHF, reinforcement learning through human feedback, and they were a competitor to Scale. And then a few months ago, I found out that there was one just hiding in the background because they didn't raise any VC money, or they didn't, and it's called Surge AI. And
Okay.
Surge AI basically figured out how to. Well, apparently, it's hard to say because these are all proprietary things, but they figured out how to basically get around a lot of the problems that we've been talking about how to get good data quality.
Yeah.
And they're now raising $1 billion. They've been completely bootstrapped, but all the big tech companies are using them because they had high quality data. Whereas Scale AI is partly to raise money because they went on the podcast and they called Scale AI a body shop. And the body shop is basically throw 1,000 bodies, 1 million bodies on this data problem, build automated systems for just getting the data as quickly as possible into the foundational labs. That's how these foundational models have been trained, is like
Yep.
millions of human beings just labeling data as good or bad,
And
regardless of
the annotation, that's totally cultural too.
yeah,
So when
yeah.
at Scale, you just have people annotating and labeling data. If the person's all the way across the world and
Yeah.
living in a small village and something, the context can be very, very different.
Yep. Huge.
Context.
It's a huge problem, and that's we could talk about the black box and the neuronal interpretability. It's like that's like a whole thing that we don't know anything about what's going on there, except that it's probably slop. And so like
Yeah.
a huge amount of it's probably slop. But then Surge AI says they figured out a good way to do it, and it is a believable story. But it feels like there's a whole bunch of new models that could appear in this data training that actually focuses on high quality data, but really goes back to what we've been talking about the whole time, which is the value of that good data has gone down because it's all
Yes.
hype. It's all like low monetary, like like money printing. My understanding is money printing basically changes the way everyone in the system values things, and so it becomes really hard to value things, and that's where we are right now. Basically, is like
Yep.
how to
And
value things. Yep.
how do you wrap your mind, like shifting data ecosystems, and creating distributed teams and changing the ownership models? So traditionally, it's been data engineering, data science, and machine learning, and you see a lot of AI projects and efforts, including the context, sort of relegated to those teams. And there's still, conversations are still about data architectures. We haven't. We're starting. I've been sort of beating this drum for a while. Is like, no, no, no. It's bigger than data infrastructure. It's information. Um, so once we start commonly talking about our knowledge architectures, not
Yeah.
our data architectures,
Yeah.
our knowledge architectures, and bringing everyone together, where I see the real opportunities that's being sadly ignored, we all celebrate MCP, right? Because
Yep.
that
It's a data
it helps.
infrastructure. Yeah.
And that's good. That's good that we are celebrating it, but we need more to support integrations, translations, and interoperability, because ultimately the game is about connecting different data sources and formats, right? Knowledge is textured. It's not all in SQL or Postgres. It's not all in JavaScript. It's not all in JSON. Like, if we look at our ecosystems as a whole, right now, the data architectures, and then all of a sudden you bring in ontologies, knowledge graphs, or those, actual systems. The real challenge, and I think the call to action is like, okay, so how do we build bridges so that this isn't just stuck? Because you hear most people in these conversations are saying, that's all great, but that's just theory. I get that so much. Even though I
Yeah,
built really successful
yeah,
systems, I still get accused of it just sitting in the land of theory, and
yeah,
that has to operationalize. How can I prove value? All of those
yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not about that. This is about how do we build the bridges and pull the knowledge thread throughout,
Brilliant.
right?
Yeah, the ROI is so funny. Return on investment, and when you dig deep into that question, like 5 questions into what they mean by ROI, it always
Yeah.
comes back to the embodied observer valuing one thing over another. Like
Yep.
you can talk about stock price, but like stock price going up, you have 365 data points for one stock. One,
Yeah.
1 point per day goes up and down and everything like that, but you can put it into 1 point. Like that's not very much information. 365, like it's not above 2000. Like you can't tie that to like the thing that some knowledge management person doing. So it's all it is just like, what do you call it? Relative data, like all on the deciders and stuff like that. And they may be good at deciding, but yeah.
There's an interesting, like I've observed this just working with customers, clients, and just from my prior roles, that there's, everyone's knowledge management, we'll call it data, but their perception of information and knowledge management is, for example, it starts on the web page. That's a relic of the Google internet web.
Oh, interesting.
Right? It starts
Yeah,
at, so
interesting.
if we're tracking and we're collecting knowledge based on the web page, you have to look at the lowest common denominator within a system, or how we define these things absent of the internet and web. Because now, if you start the journey on the web, then how do you leverage any of your approach? How can you apply that same approach with your data, information, and knowledge if the journey starts on the web page? That's, first of all, very ephemeral, and it's very one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, that same content or that same data and information has to be used in multiple different systems. And we have to be able to pass the information and data through the entire journey or life cycle.
What do you mean?
So that means that, okay, so I publish content and it lives on 2 different web pages.
Yeah.
But the underlying content is not very well defined. It may be tagged, but that's about it.
Got it.
Right? So there's something that comes before what used to be only that web journey. Now, all of a sudden, that content needs to be modeled, shaped, and structured and contextualized before it hits the web page. Because ultimately, when you publish something on a web page or on an application or a platform, it's capturing a moment in time.
Interesting.
Content has a life cycle, right?
Yeah.
And that life, we have to start looking at this from a life cycle perspective, but also more broadly, if this content needs to exist absent, the knowledge has to be structured agnostic to how it's going to be used in the future, the multiple ways it can be used. Because that same content, now all of a sudden we're using that content with AI, right? And so that journey, if we capture it in the same way as we do for web experiences or application or product-based experiences,
interesting.
There becomes this almost precursor, since we're integrating agents and AI into those experiences.
That was I think I got 30% of that, but I like it when I only get a part of it. So it reminds me of something else that I think I got from you, or one of the books that you've talked about, which is that you have an author. And an author, instead of looking at it like the book, you think about the book because you're reading the book, but really you have the author who wrote the book, and the book is a part of their work, and the work is the whole thing. And with AI, it's all changing now, because now you can not only simulate the book and have a conversation with the book, but you can also simulate the author and simulate all their work and have a conversation with a digital twin of that. So is that what you meant by the website? The website is just one aspect of this, like a company which have.
And one thing can have many different assets. right?
Yeah.
So you could choose, if you model a piece of content, you have the work, the author, the provenance, the description, the title, the edition, the provenance would
Oh,
include,
interesting.
right? And so you should be able to change the orientation or lens, right? So we should be able to pull up, if you think of searching in a knowledge management system, I can look something up by author, by
Oh,
format,
yep.
by media type. Like I want if you think of just going and getting a book on Amazon, it's like, do you want the
Interesting.
Kindle? It will tell you everything that's available.
Yeah,
You also go
interesting.
to the author's page. Like it's a really connected journey.
So it's an
Um,
ecosystem. It is an entire environment. And how do you, rather than just thinking about the website, you have to think about the entire environment that the website sits in, which is this giant company with thousands of people. And that, yeah, that's a really good reframe
because,
on.
for example, in the instance of like Amazon, I may not be able to get the Kindle, for example, or I may not, something, there may be a different orientation around Amazon where if I go to the publisher site,
Oh,
it
interesting.
that looks very different versus if I go to the library, like a library ecosystem, it's going to tell me, like WorldCat is going to tell me everywhere that this book exists throughout the entire universe and its availability.
So that's what you're talking about with the library systems, that those systems are incredibly detailed at that level of analysis. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that you should be able to change your lens in any instance, because it's less about the application or the product. It's more about the user journey.
Oh, interesting. And it's again going back to the, like, it's not about the website, it's about the person using the website, which has become extremely clear to me as now I'm building apps for myself of just solving my own problems, is like all the little details that go into what I like that other people have thought about in other ways, but I never thought about, because that's their job, is to abstract that away from me thinking about it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so there's like interesting experiments where I see people trying to build their own personal knowledge management systems in Obsidian.
Interesting. Yeah.
And people do the same in notation. Notion,
Yep.
sorry,
Yep.
Notion.
Yep.
So and you can really leverage and use these different systems to kind of get a hang of or idea of how to build them. But ultimately, the most simplistic way to think about it is what are you calling this thing? What's the context? Define it according to
Mm-hmm.
context and link that context to the canonical meaning of that thing.
Interesting. Yeah,
Right?
because it's the outside world. Interesting.
Yeah, so you always have to touch grass. Um, and part of it comes, it's a whole nother socio-technical thing of
Yeah.
how we anthropomorphize our experiences with AI,
Yeah.
where we really think that there's feeling, that there's
Yeah.
real thought and consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, it kind
Um,
of is like there's a ghost, there's a ghost of it in there, because it's a token that's related to some experience that a human had at some point, but it's like very far abstracted from it.
yes. And so the whole idea, the thing that is worrying me right now within like, in terms of truthfulness and removing
Yeah.
bias and
Yeah.
all of those things, all that goodness that you try to orchestrate when you build these like rich knowledge management ecosystems, um,
Interesting.
is the anthropomorphizing of these models. Because ultimately, if we rely, consciousness or conscience, it can be seen as the seventh sense, human sense. We rarely talk about it, but we have remnants or ideas of it when we say, "Oh, I have a gut feeling,"
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Or I'm not sure. Even vibe, if you think of
Yep.
it from
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
perspective, like
Yep.
it's good feelings, good feels. We have good feels about this. We're just
Mm.
so it's like the idea of being realistic about these models, that they are snapshots in time, right? I mean, because the training data also that the commercial models come with are, the training data is older. It's not as fresh.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It
So
hasn't been updated.
yeah, and part of consciousness is
Yeah. Yeah.
involves human memory,
Yep.
which
And
goes
these
back
are,
to knowledge,
Oh,
which we're lacking
with these
and
systems.
yeah, and like an example is like my family had like a 400+ year old bread recipe that was passed down and down and down. And when my dad died, did any of us bother to get the recipe
Yeah,
from?
interesting. Yeah, and that's how knowledge gets lost. I've been doing such a deep dive into the 1490s and what happened. How do we lose all the knowledge? And it just happened like that. It's just like, well, no one thought about it. It just like yeah.
There was a dumbing down because of the
That's
feudal society. This was what I studied in
mm-hmm.
history with my history degree. Is that's mainly what I studied was that sort of societal. There was a system, and you had the crown, and you had the church, and the people who could read, right, were the wealthy, and everyone else became illiterate. Come the 1600s, Martin Luther, you had a very illiterate population.
And the key thing was the vernacular. You never put the Bible in the French. You never put the Bible in German or English, and you can get created as a heretic if you do that. I just found that out a few days ago.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, they chase
the way that the way that Martin Luther communicated with people, which is really strange to think about if you had the dumbing down and the brain drain that happened from the and onwards, and then all of a sudden, the main method of communicating became memes.
Yep, he was the first first meme lord and the first viral celebrity. Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah. And it is like I've been thinking a lot about that because we're seeing that now, right? We're seeing sort
interesting
of down.
But it's not because nobody has access to information. It's because people have too much information that the meme is the avenue at which communication can be cut through. Is you just put it in something that somebody can immediately have a visceral reaction to. It's almost like going back to hieroglyphics. We're going back to hieroglyphics.
Totally. And it's incredible that the other thing I think that's a major concern is that knowledge management, it's a collective action that has a higher calling.
Interesting.
It involves inevitably, because we touched on bias, critical thinking.
Yeah, interesting.
And that is my biggest concern, is this idea of expecting room service. That when we say automation, when we say, because what I find a lot is in my writing and the responses or feedback I get from what I publish or what I speak about, people whose first reaction is, how can this be automated? Or I figured out a way to automate it. It's not that automation is bad, but it's about setting up the foundation and being selective about what can be automated.
Stop trying to automate the human out of it, which is a big mistake. Yeah.
A big mistake. Like, we are making these systems in our image, so to speak.
Oh, interesting.
Right? And so it's right. It's hard, it's if we, an example is with my my new consultancy at the beginning, I was like, I'm going to automate a contractual agreement. I'll just give you one example. And like, best intentions, I'm a pretty smart person, and I did glance and review it. And then the customer, and I'm being totally honest and disclosing this because I think it's important. The customer all of a sudden came back to counter negotiate with me, asking, and to me it was out of the blue, for full free rights and license to use ontology pipeline for life.
Oh. Wow.
Like, what? It didn't occur to me. I was like, why is he, where is he going with this? Like, why would he want, this is just like a short engagement. Why is he wanting my IP?
Yeah.
And I realized that the agent had granted that to him in the legal agreement in this one little clause.
Whoa, interesting. It reminds me of the flip side, which is exactly what you just said, except totally flipped, which is that I signed a contract when I bought my house in 2020, the first time I had ever bought a house. And in that had a contractual obligation to buy insurance because the insurance is required by the state, and did not read the document about the insurance that I purchased because it all came bundled in one convenient little package that I'm sure like 95% of people did exactly what I just did. And then 3 years later, my roof collapsed because of a snowstorm. Luckily, the insurance adjuster had said that a tree had fallen rather than the snow collapse because the tree had also fallen. And so he blamed him, the human in the loop, went and blamed the tree, thankfully, allowing me to get a roof. Otherwise, I would have been totally screwed. But yeah, that just happened just because there's just giant contract, and I just assumed like, oh, our system's great. Our system's, it's been working for hundreds of years. I don't have to go and think about that now. But that's like the agentic, because the insurance company has their agents and they're acting as agent, like the AI agent that you mentioned, and they're doing it in favor of the insurance system so that they don't have any risk. And me, as this little guy just buying this thing, didn't realize that of what I'm contractually obligated to. It's like, it's such an interesting thing. And I think AI is there's an optimistic case, which is that AI is going to remove a lot of the fluff, because it does get us down to like the private tutoring aspect of this thing, although it's not 100% accurate, definitely is very broad. And I can find out about all these different contracts and get really good information transparency as long as I ask the question. And I think that will lead to some benefit.
Yeah, and I mean that inevitably, I don't know how many customer service flows you've engaged with, and almost everything's automated now. Those aren't new architectures. That's the thing.
Because they're at least 15 years old, 20 years old of this terms of service. Like, you just hit the terms of service and you signed your thing.
Yes. But, I flew back from New York a few days ago, and the big Delta kiosk in the airport was like, said something about ticket agent. Like, it was a line for ticket agent, but it was a big banner that said ticket agent. And I was like thinking about it, and just my interactions within customer service, chats and support workflows, and that whole concept of agent, which we used to appropriate human, all of a sudden in call centers is being appropriate. It's a very
interesting
transition or translation. But agent, human agent and an AI agent are obviously very different. Now, the frustration of dealing with agents that, within broken knowledge ecosystems,
interesting.
I've had some pretty, I had a pretty big, I guess I'll call it a folly with that had pretty big negative impacts from just misunderstanding and meaning, the lack of knowledge infrastructure that had a huge impact on something in my life. And it's like, the stakes, the hard thing is, without regulation, some of the stakes can be very high for people. And we see this in like medical spaces as well, that it's almost is the honeymoon. I have a sense that the honeymoon period's starting kind of close, in that like playtime's going to be over soon, as we see a thinning of the herd, which we're seeing quite a bit right now with a lot of these mergers and acquisitions that are very strategic, where you have a lot of these companies that are acquiring classical knowledge and information management companies like Informatica.
So there's centralization of the knowledge management space, or is this
large companies that are acquiring, because they are, one lens or view would, because they're missing that muscle within their organization. So they think of, if they buy it, like ServiceNow bought data.world, data catalog and governance company. And so by acquiring this missing muscle or missing limb by way of the acquisition, they can inherit some of those.
But then the culture swallows it up, and the fundamental problem doesn't get solved because of all the things that we've been talking about.
You can cross your fingers and like hope so. I think it's early days, kind of early to see or tell what's going on. You see the open semantic initiative. I think it's I think it's initiative. The Snowflake, the big sort of collaborative
Interesting.
open semantic initiative. You see that, that announcement. There are
Yeah.
companies and environments that are making the right noise,
Yeah. Interesting.
right?
Who are
But
company?
we really haven't seen the fruits of those acquisitions and efforts yet.
Interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. Can you talk more about your consultancy and how people can find it?
Sure. So I started a consultancy called Contextually. That was back, this summer. And so I also have Ontology Pipeline, which teaches how to build these knowledge ecosystems. That's kind of the learning arm. So my model for my consultancy is what I call collaborative consulting, which is really about teaching through doing and setting people up for success by helping to teach and build the skills. Because all too often, like, consultants leave, they do a job with room service, and then that consultant leaves, and there's no way to, the people, the skills are not in place to maintain and continue to iterate and scale. So my real focus is teaching and consulting right now, coaching and consulting, but less of a room service approach.
I love it. So go find Jessica on LinkedIn. I've gotten so much information and learning from her. So definitely go check her out on LinkedIn. Thanks.
Thanks.